Hello, I'm Richard Del Bello. I'm the director of the Office of Space Commerce. As you probably know, there's been a dramatic increase in the amount of activity in space. As a result, the White House and the US Congress have asked the Office of Space Commerce in the Department of Commerce to begin the implementation of a new space traffic monitoring system for civil and commercial users. We call this system the Traffic Coordination System for Space, or TraCSS for short. When we began the TraCSS program, we committed to engage with the broad space traffic community, including commercial satellite operators, commercial SSA providers, academia, and our international partners. This video is just one part of our engagement strategy, which will involve a series of virtual and in-person meetings. Today, we intend to update you on the objectives and the progress of the TraCSS program. Sandy Magnus, who has been leading our TraCSS implementation effort, will be providing a detailed overview of our program, its future direction, and opportunities for you to stay engaged as we move forward. Although the Department of Commerce is leading this effort, we are not working on it alone. Before we hear from Sandy, I would also like to ask you to listen to our partners at the Department of Defense and NASA. You will first hear from Travis Langster, Principal Director, Space Policy in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and Sandra Connolly, the Deputy Associate Administrator at NASA's Science Mission Directorate. Thanks again for your interest in the TraCSS program. I look forward to working with you on this important program and making it a tremendous success. Thank you.
The United States has, utilizing the extensive U.S. space surveillance network, led the international community in sharing space situation awareness information with space operators to support spaceflight safety. Commercial space companies have launched thousands of new satellites over the past few years and plan to launch tens of thousands more. As the Earth's orbit becomes increasingly congested with space traffic and hazardous debris, SSA's needs for commercial, civil, and national security missions have also evolved. Space Policy Directive 3 directed a transfer of responsibility from the Department of Defense to the Department of Commerce for providing basic SSA and space traffic management services to commercial and civil operators. DoD and DOC signed a Memorandum of Agreement in September 2022, framing both departments' relationship for basic space situation awareness, space traffic management, and coordination for civil and commercial entities. This MOA began discussions on transition priorities and coordination. Working groups were established and are continuing work on defining data transfer needs and roles and responsibilities across this transition. DOC's Office of Space Commerce is developing the Traffic Coordination System for Space, or TraCSS, that will provide basic SSA data and services to support civil and commercial satellite owner-operators. In Phase 1, TraCSS will lean more on DoD data at first. With each phase, more commercial data and commercial SSA services will be integrated over time. This phase transition will help ensure there is no disruption in basic SSA safety services. The transition from DoD to DOC is about more than just transferring data. DoD is working with OSC to ensure that its expertise in SSA analysis and spaceflight safety operations is being passed along as well. Our team will be sharing best practices, mistakes to avoid, and other knowledge derived from our extensive experience with SSA in order to set OSC up for success. This transition will allow the USG to better address SSA needs of commercial and civil operators, and it will allow DoD to focus on critical missions that make our nation more secure, both in its endeavors in space and here on Earth. DoD is committed to working with DOC on the successful transition of these SSA responsibilities and looks forward to the exciting work ahead.
Hello, I am Sandra Connolly, Deputy Associate Administrator for NASA's Science Mission Directorate. NASA's Science Mission Directorate operates one of the world's largest and widespread satellite constellations. NASA has more than half a century of knowledge and experience operating satellites in a safe and sustainable way. Right now, our space environment nearest to Earth has become more and more crowded with satellites and debris. To navigate these obstacles, NASA pioneered new techniques and methods that we have put into practice to continue to keep our satellites operating safely and sustainably. NASA is excited to partner with the Office of Space Commerce to bring the best of NASA's expertise and knowledge to the traffic coordination system for space. While the Science Mission Directorate has the lead for working with OSC, we are also bringing in the best expertise within all of NASA to support OSC in putting the world's best space traffic system into place. As Richard mentioned, NASA is excited to be leading the Horizon portion of TraCSS. In this role, we will be creating an integrated development environment to provide OSC insight and guidance on the new space situational awareness data sources and services that could provide better coordination for space traffic. TraCSS Horizon will act as a sandbox to advance the state-of-the-art in space situational awareness and space traffic coordination research and development, and provide a test environment for assessing the ability of existing and new space situational awareness data and services without interrupting normal operations. New sources and services that can meet the needs that OSC sets out for TraCSS can then be moved into operations within the operational tracks OASIS and SKYLINE. We are assessing options to implement as quickly as possible to support the overall TraCSS Phase 1 timeline. In addition to the development environment for Horizons, NASA will also be leading the development of new as well as improved services that will be necessary to meet future needs for space traffic coordination. As the lead for research and development, NASA will coordinate with OSC and engage with a greater research community to find cost-effective solutions to meet these emerging needs. This community engagement will leverage existing and tailored NASA programs for research and development. Our plan is to begin these activities by the end of the year. All of us at NASA are very excited to be a key partner to the Office of Space Commerce as they provide the leadership needed at the critical time to help advance spaceflight safety and sustainability.
Hello, I'm Sandra Magnus, and I'm the Acting Program Manager and Chief Engineer for the Traffic Coordination System for Space. And what I'm going to do today is walk you through where we are with the system, what we're planning for it, and discuss the roadmap through that plan all the way out through the several phases that we have. As you have noticed in the introduction, this is a very, very strong interagency effort, and we're delighted to have great partners in the Department of Defense and in NASA. So without further ado, I'm going to just jump into the slides, and hopefully you'll find this webinar very informational and, of course, You know where to find us if you have questions. This will not be the only outreach we do on this topic. We're going to continue to have a cadence of outreaches, whether it's webinars like this or workshops like we've had this month with the owner-operators and the space situational awareness service providers, in order to make sure we're having a strong community engagement as we continue developing and implementing this system, which is, as you know, so important for space safety and sustainability. So let me just dive right in. For those of you who may not be aware of why the Office of Space Commerce is embarking on a traffic coordination system for space, I'm just going to go over a little bit of background. And for those of you who are aware, maybe you want to fast forward a little bit. But we're all, I think, very well aware that there are thousands of satellites launching every year. There are more and more and more satellites going up. We need better space situational awareness in Earth orbit. We need to be paying attention to safety. We need to be paying attention to sustainability. There's a lot of international collaboration that has to happen. Space Policy Directive 3, issued in 2018, stated that a civil organization should be created to do space sustainability and space safety for the commercial space industry, moving the responsibility for that from the DoD into this new civil organization with a direction to focus on safety and sustainability. The Department of Commerce was directed to unfold this mission, and inside the Department of Commerce, the Office of Space Commerce was delegated this responsibility. So NOAA recently reorganized and expanded the Office of Space Commerce, which had been resident under NESDIS inside NOAA. NOAA said, okay, we're going to expand this capability for the Office of Space Commerce, and it's going to develop this SSA capability, and we will be charged with blending the commercial data and the government data to create the traffic coordination system for space. When we looked at designing and developing the system and considering what should a civil space traffic system look like, we really wanted to look at it through what is an inherent government function kind of lens. And I already mentioned it: space safety, space sustainability, and international collaboration. I think it's pretty clear that we're going to have, for the near and mid-future, a globally federated space situational awareness system. There are lots of regional, national systems spread around the globe that are being set up by different entities, and as the U.S.-based system, we're going to have to work with them, and we look forward to collaborating with them for global space safety. So that is an inherent government function. Of course, safety and sustainability, I think, is pretty clear. So wrapped around that core of inherent government function, we went to, okay, what are our objectives and some guidelines that we should keep in mind as we consider how to implement a civil space traffic coordination system. Of course, one of the main objectives that we have with the TRAC system is to relieve DoD of the responsibility for SSA coordination of the burgeoning global commercial space industry. There is so much activity going on in space that the private sector is engaging in, and not just here in the United States, but all around the world, that it really is time to have a civil organization that's focused on that industry, doing space safety and sustainability, that allows the DoD to continue to do their very important protect and defend mission and focus on that. And that provides the civil organization the opportunity to then engage globally with our federated SSA partners as well for the global industry to make sure it thrives and continues to advance. In that reign, we were directed in Space Policy Directive 3 to provide some basic space situational awareness services, and again, focused on safety. There was a set of basic services defined last year. An RFI was released asking input from industry and the commercial sector and the private sector on those basic services. We really appreciate all the responses we got. We provided some feedback on those responses in an April webinar, which is also posted on the webpage where you found this webinar, and you are, of course, free to take a look at that if you have any questions. The basic services are going to evolve over time as we get smarter about what your needs are for safety, as we get smarter about how we're going to collaborate globally with our federated partners. Another guiding tenet is, of course, we want to take advantage of the existing USA commercial space situational awareness capabilities that are out there and rely on those providers to the greatest extent possible. That means we're really focused on building the minimum government infrastructure we need to cover the inherent governmental function of what we're doing. And that is really a strong tenet. I know it seems like we're moving very slowly, and we probably are moving a lot more slowly than people wish, but we really are focused on that guideline, and you'll see more and more of that as we get more mature in our development and in our implementation, and some of that will be discussed further in this webinar. Of course, in the RFI responses, we had a very strong, I would say, emphasis on having one common catalog or data repository that we all should work out of. That was a very interesting comment across both owner-operators and service providers. And of course, from an international collaboration viewpoint, it's important to have one sort of outward-facing, this is the U.S. Community's space situational awareness kind of data that we want to share globally. So we are going to use this data repository, the OASIS, which I'll talk about in a moment, to produce the basic services, as well as do that inherently government international collaboration and coordination role. In SPD3, we were directed also to introduce research and development roadmaps and advance the science and technology of space situational awareness. And as you've already heard, NASA is a strong partner with us on that. And finally, promoting global SSA standards and best practices. And actually, that was the nature of the workshops that we had this past month with the owner-operators and the SSA providers to start talking about data standards and things like this. It was, again, a very strong response in the RFI that there was a very strong consensus that we do need standards and we should follow best practices. And so we're working to sort of peel the layer back on that and say, okay, what standards and what best practices? And we're having those conversations now. So getting into a little bit more detail, what exactly is TraCSS? I think some of you are probably familiar with the open architecture data repository. That was some language that was pulled through SPD3, and there was a prototype that was demonstrated a year or two ago. We've basically changed that focus to the traffic coordination system for space. So you'll hear me mention TraCSS frequently throughout this presentation. So what exactly is TraCSS? So I'm going to describe it verbally, and then I have a picture for you so you can kind of see it visually. But at the basic foundation of the TraCSS system is what we call OASIS, which is the data repository. This is the key part of the system to ingest data and products and information from a lot of different sources and hold it in that repository for use in the SKYLINE application hosting service infrastructure. And that's where we'll be plugging in third-party, i.e. commercial/private, SSA capabilities in order to execute the mission of the basic services. And finally, the TraCSS Horizon, which you heard Sandra discuss earlier. There are two partitions to the TraCSS Horizon. One partition is sort of, if you will, a mini-me or an instantiation of the operating environment, so we can do verification and validation in the appropriate environment to make sure new capabilities that we're onboarding engage correctly and don't basically break anything before we send new capabilities over to the operational environment. The other partition is the sandbox that Sandra referred to earlier in the introduction. It's the research and development environment. It's where people who are interested in developing new technologies, using archival data, and working in an environment that's similar to TraCSS can do their research and do their development and do their experimentation or their modeling and their simulation. So those are the three components of TraCSS, which visually you can see on this slide. The data sources coming in are going to be everything from DoD unclassified data. There could be some international data sources from international partners, clearly commercial data, commercial information and products, owner-operator data, both metadata about the satellites and ephemerides, environmental data. There was a lot of comments in the RFI about understanding space weather models for the LEO crowd and other sorts of atmospheric information. So that will all be the data types that are ingested into the OASIS. And in that repository, we'll have some APIs that will be able to pulled into the user interface at the top and definitely into the SKYLINE environment for use by the third-party applications that we contract with to do the basic services. And so the user portal will be a little bit separate because they'll be pulling APIs out of the OASIS data lake, and the third-party applications will be putting their data back into the OASIS data lake. So everything is really resident in that OASIS data lake for use from machine-machine viewpoint or GUIs on a website that will be hosting for the user interfaces. The TraCSS Horizon, again, is off to the side where there'll be an instantiation of the operating environment for V&V, and of course, archival data will be hosted over there as well. So this is a nice pictorial, hopefully, to give you a good overview of the TraCSS system. And a little bit more of a technical look just to give people a feel for what Phase 1 looks like. And I should say we're going to roll the TraCSS program out in phases. Phase 1, and the phases were defined based on the Department of Defense's priorities on what they are trying to offload with respect to workload and ramping down their space situational awareness services to industry. So Phase 1 is all about the on-orbit collision avoidance calculations and producing conjunction data messages. Phase 2 is about launch COLA and things related to that. And Phase 3 is about reentry. And I'm not really going to talk about Phase 2 and 3 too much at the moment. All of the remarks that I'm going to be producing are related to Phase 1. We are actually rolling out Phase 1 in steps as well, and I'll walk you through that. Along with the funding that we got in fiscal year 23 was a direction that we should have a capability of some sort instantiated by September of fiscal year 2024. And so you'll see that we are phasing Phase 1 in, and this is sort of an overview from a technical viewpoint of the Phase 1 end configuration that shows you how we're setting up the government infrastructure. The three indications on the left where you see cloud utility, system integrator, and user interface are three separate procurements that we are going to undertake to procure those particular pieces of the system. So we're not procuring one turnkey system. We're procuring it in layers so they can be independent, and we have the flexibility to adjust each layer as required as TraCSS grows, because I'm sure you're all well aware and understand the need to have a scalable system and a flexible system to take into account not only the needs that we have on orbit for space safety and sustainability, but also the technology innovations that are going to be happening out of the R&D environment and, more importantly, in the commercial sector. So for Phase 1, the cloud utility, that's basically what it sounds like. It's just the cloud servers that we're going to base the system on. They'll be on a gov cloud that we contract from a commercial provider. The system integrator contract and that procurement is the single most important procurement that we're going to make, because that contractor, that vendor, will help us establish the basic infrastructure, including the data repository details of that, how we design and manage and instantiate that and keep that secure, as well as that infrastructure and the sizing and provisioning of the cloud that will allow us to plug in the third-party capabilities. And the user interface will be procured from a separate procurement, again, because the APIs will be able to be utilized, and we can separate what's happening in the guts of the system, if you will, from how the user, you, are experiencing the system. Outlined in green, you will see the specific things that we are acquiring in Phase 1 from the commercial SSA providers. And those capabilities will be phased in across the process of the building up of the Phase 1. Again, Phase 1 all about on-orbit conjunction analysis and building up a robust system that can support safety there. And I'll go through all the Phase 1 configurations and then talk about future efforts with the other phases as we go through the webinar. This is the Phase 1 capability rollout plan, and you can see the schedule for over the next year or two. Again, we have to report in quarter 4 of fiscal year 24 with a capability. And we approached this phasing in a crawl, walk, run manner intentionally because we received a lot of feedback from you in the RFIs concerned about how the DoD services were going to be discontinued or not discontinued based on how TraCSS services are being stood up. And so what we've planned is a very slow change from the commercial industry receiving data from the DoD over to TraCSS in a way that does not disturb current operations and allows everyone to get comfortable that as we shift the emphasis of the commercial community from DoD to using the TraCSS system, that it goes smoothly and everyone feels comfortable with it. And we are working with the DoD on the plans of how we're shifting the community, what data you're going to be receiving from which portal and how, and we have very active discussions about that. So consequently, in September of 2024, our approach is do no harm. And so what we're doing is we're ingesting DoD data, that's VCMs plus ancillary files, so we can recreate the ephemerides, and we've already shown that we can recreate exactly the same kind of ephemerides that the DoD has. We'll put that into a screening tool, and then we will produce conjunction data messages. Now, we are screening twice as often as the DoD in that initial phase. So we'll be screening every 4 hours instead of every 8 hours. So we're going to increase the cadence of screening, which was something, again, in the RFIs that was a desired, very strong desirement, if you will, from the community to increase the cadence of screening. So we're going to just start right out the gate with that. Also, what we're going to do is we're going to have a program that we engage with the commercial sector, which I will talk about shortly, of improving owner-operator ephemerides to a certain level of quality. So that goes into the screening, therefore improving the general quality of the conjunction analysis that's happening. And so those are two improvements that we're starting right off the bat with this initial rollout. Again, small improvements, but yet very important, and feedback we got from you in the RFIs was these were two critical ones that everyone was immediately looking forward to. We are going to distribute the CDMs in that quarter 4 phase 1.0 out of spacetrack.org. So everyone will still be receiving data the way they're used to receiving data. So we're not going to disturb that system just yet. We are working with spacetrack.org and the DoD folks on exactly what that's going to look like, but that's the first quarter, phase 1.0. We're assuming we're going to have some bugs like any new startup does, so we have a phase 1.1, which is, okay, let's just fix the stuff that we didn't get quite as right as we wish we would have, and then let's move into the next rollout. And this, again, will be an engagement with the commercial SSA providers. We're going to put in some pretty intense data integrity monitoring, both on what's coming out of the ephemerides recreation of the DoD, which we'll probably already have in place actually, but also the quality of the conjunction screenings, the quality of the CDMs, the quality of the ephemerides that are coming in, not just the ones that we've improved, but also in other owner-operators. And all of this integrity monitoring is really focused on the safety mission. We really want to develop some metrics for, for example, in owner-operator ephemerides, what is good enough from a safety viewpoint? How do we acquire that? And again, we have some studies on that I'll go into in a little bit more. We're going to then add what we're calling a mission planning function. The mission planning function is basically a box, again, engaging with a commercial provider, a box coming out of the conjunction screenings. Someone will have someone look at those and say, oh, it looks like that particular conjunction needs a little bit more information. So we're going to put a task out to the commercial providers and say, hey, there's a secondary out, here's a secondary we want some more tracking information on because we need a better ephemeris on it. So, we're tasking you to go get this data, create the ephemeris, feed it back into our screening, and then produce a better quality CDM. When we do task on a secondary in a conjunction, we will be sending a notice to the owner-operator that says, hey, For this particular conjunction, we are trying to acquire better information on the secondary, so there's some more information coming, and keep them in the loop on that. So that's the mission planning phase. At this point also, we'll have been building up the user interface and have an owner-operator presentation layer and the machine-to-machine capability there. And of course, that's going to be built gradually over time, but the 1.3 there is when it's, I think, going to be, more or less live and full up. And then as we go to phase 1.4, we're going to shift into getting the conjunction analysis from a government-based to a commercial industry-based provider, as well as we'll have the TraCSS public presentation layer available. And so at the end of phase 1.0, we will have instantiated and operational all of the on-orbit capability and offloaded that successfully from the DoD. So the path to getting to this capability is going to be very busy, because I mentioned all of these different phases we're going through and the different items that we're adding in each phase. For each one of those capabilities that we're putting into phase 1.0, we have to do some pathfinders and some studies in order to understand a couple of things. Number one, the metrics that we're going to use to both define safety, but also to understand the level to which we need to procure that particular service. And then the third thing we're going to be the third thing that we're going to be learning in these pathfinders is, as the government, how do we actually procure these services? What's the mechanism we're going to use? How do we understand how to be a good customer and set up the right acquisition methodologies, and so forth and so on? And so what you see on this chart is a series of pathfinder studies, the rough time frame that they're going to be engaged, and then how that will lead to contract awards, and then how that leads to the delivery of the capabilities. So for example, just to talk about the improved owner-operator ephemerides. So clearly that's been happening in industry for a while. There are companies out there that do this. What we're trying to understand is, what exactly does improved mean from the context of basic safety? Because clearly there's also levels of details that industry wants, owner-operators want to know just to drive their business cases. But we care about the safety piece as the government. So what is that kind of line in the sand between those two, and can we even define it? And then using that information that will feed into, if we hire an SSA provider to do an improved owner-operator ephemeris, then now we have a way of saying, okay, we want this quality of data, this quantity of data, and we can put some metrics around it just for the purposes of acquisition. So we're getting a little bit smarter on that. And we're going to have some very robust conversations with the SSA providers around these topics, because we know there's some experience out there that we can gain. Same thing with the rest of the pathfinders. They're really all about learning some of these things about the metrics and some of these things about the acquisition, leading into contract awards, and then integration into the system. You'll notice that the cloud utility, we've already been engaged in that procurement, and we expect to have the cloud utility on board in the next few months. The system integrator, again, is our critical path. It's also, we're in the process of doing market research on that. And we're spending an appropriate amount of time to make sure we have a good strategy, we have a well-written work statement, and we are thoroughly researching what the capabilities are, because, again, that is the most critical procurement that we're going to be doing. The commercial user interface, the user front end, will follow after that. In the meantime, we'll have started the owner-operator EFEM Pathfinder. That's going to start here in the next month or two. The mission planning Pathfinder, again, it's all about when we're tasking, what's the mechanism we're going to use to task for secondaries? What's the quantified data we're going to collect? What's the quality factor on that? How are we going to acquire it? We have a lot to learn there. And again, we're looking at this through the lens of safety and sustainability. So we're going to be quite busy, and we're hoping to engage very vigorously with the commercial SSA provider world and the owner-operators on these pathfinders to make sure that what we're doing leads to a very robust phase 1.0 when we get to the end of it. So I think you'll see from this slide that there's going to be a lot getting kicked off here in the very near term. You know, as I mentioned, we've been using these last few months to make sure we have a solid plan. So I'm going to walk you through, this is now pictorially, I'm going to walk you through what I just said in words. So this is what phase 1.0 looks like. We have the DoD catalog. Basically, we're collecting the vector messages and the orbit model parameters. We're collecting that instead of robust ephemerides from the DoD because that's a huge amount of data, a wide bandwidth that's a little more expensive to propagate that over. So we're going to be using the same software to regenerate the ephemerides to make sure that we have a one-to-one comparison with what they're doing. We, of course, have some QA checks and some minimal data checks on this first stage. We're going to be contracting with the SSA providers to do these improved owner-operator ephemerides, which will be defined as a result of that study I just talked about. We're screening every 4 hours, and you'll get the data as owner-operators through spacetrack.org. So that's 1.0. We jump to 1.2. We add some extra levels of data integrity monitoring, a little bit more experience with the host system. We get to 1.3. We had the mission planning. This talks a little bit more. I'll leave the slide up for a second so you can read it. This talks a little bit more about the mission planning function and the idea of how we're going to send out to the secondary providers, because we have no interest in tracking the capabilities of all of the sensors out there. We would like to just put a notice out and say, hey, we're looking for data on this, and then we have to figure out the mechanism by which we're going to coordinate with those data providers to get that data in. And again, the owner-operators will receive notification of the tasking. But you can see we're building capabilities and we're building our engagement with commercial SSA providers as we work through each set of these phases. And I reemphasize that we're doing a crawl, walk, run, and we're coordinating very carefully with the DoD. So as we onboard services, as we onboard capabilities, we understand what the overlap is with respect to what the DoD is engaging the commercial industry with and when they're shutting off their engagement. So we're not planning on having any step function changes in here, but some very smooth transitions. And we've got some really great conversations happening between us and DoD around this conversation. Finally, phase 1.4, which is the final phase 1 build out. You'll see that we basically, the pictorial looks the same, but we've added the complete website interface for the public, and the owner-operator and provider interfaces are also up and robust at this time. And we will be, at this point, phasing out of the DoD, their commercial-facing services in this area by the time we get to phase 1.4. So that's an overview of TRACS phase 1.0. And I hope you can see there's a lot going on. There's a lot of engagement we're going to be doing with you, the private sector. There's a lot of international engagement we're going to be doing as we roll this all out. And there's some learning points that we, the government, have to have. And hopefully we can leverage the learning that's happened in the commercial sector. So what else is going on? So phase 2 basic services, Launch Cola is a service that the DoD has been doing to fulfill the requirement that the FAA has for industry to get a license in that area. We have started our engagements with the FAA. We would like to work with them to look at the Launch Cola process, taking this opportunity as we shift from the DoD to TRACS, taking this opportunity with the FAA to look at that process and just think critically about the requirement and if the implementation as it's currently being done meets the requirement. So we're going to kind of do a refresh on that, and the FAA is eager to do this, and we're excited to start that work this fall. And so we'll be bringing, of course, the FAA into the merry band of government agencies who are working on TRACS. The reentry management and assessment is going to be a little bit more complicated, which is why it's third. There are FAA equities in this, there are DoD equities in this, and TRACS equities in this. And I suspect what's going to happen is we're going to have some ongoing coordination with the DoD with respect to at least how tips are done and how TRACS and spacetrack.org works together. But that's our third priority as far as understanding the movement of services from the DoD to the commercial sector in the area of reentry management assessment. So we're just slowly, getting into each of these conversations as the phasing it requires as we bring it along. We've been having some very robust and very timely conversations with DoD. We meet weekly. We are working on the formal data transfer and what that looks like. We are working on roles and responsibilities. We are working on different scenarios and walking through those scenarios to get a feel for the types of questions that we need to be asking as we consider the transition. We are going to be setting up technical working groups around state management. We're going to be setting up working groups around the details of the transition from spacetrack.org to TRACS. We're going to actually have later on, we're going to have a working group just about mega constellations or large constellations and how to manage those, or how the DoD's been doing it, and gain some information on what we should be doing on the TRACS side. We will definitely be engaging with industry as we get to that point. So there is a lot going on. The working group with the FAA, which will include the DoD on the Launch COLA piece. A lot going on, and we really are excited about all the possibilities that we have here to set up a really strong system. The procurements I mentioned, they're in work. The cloud utility is nearly awarded. The system integration, we're in market research phase. The user interface, the work statement's being written, and that will follow shortly. And again, we're focused on what is the minimum infrastructure we need to build in order to provide the basic services the way we've been directed, through the lens of the inherent government responsibilities of safety, sustainability, and international collaboration, and using the guiding principles as our guide and how we're thinking about implementing. I've talked a little bit about the planning, the studies, and the pathfinders. Those are going to be mainly executed out of the TRACS Horizons environment, working very closely with our NASA partners. Those are going to continue through the rest of the phases. I think we're going to be in learning mode for quite some time. And if you have ideas for things that we should be studying, we're open all ears. We would like to leverage the experience out there to the greatest extent possible. The basic service definitions will be evolving. There was a lot of comments in the RFI about some services that perhaps the EUSST is offering that we're not, some services that perhaps the DoD is offering that we don't have defined in basic services. I suspect as we learn more about what the DoD is doing, as we learn more about our international collaboration and what that's going to look like, our basic services will be evolving. The current set is, as defined in the RFI. We'll be communicating as things evolve. And again, the feedback we get from you in the industry is also going to define how these services evolve. And this is, not just in phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3, but really over the life of the traffic coordination system for space. As space gets more and more congested, more busy, more and more actors, a wide variety of actors with wide variety of experiences, a wide variety of business interests up there. There is a need to stay flexible as we consider what we're offering from a safety and a sustainability viewpoint. And finally, we have had some very robust international engagements already on the TRACS system, and those are only going to continue as we mature our thoughts about what we're doing, and as other regional centers get their engagements going and their operations going, and we all start to really understand how we can work together for the benefit of global space safety and space sustainability. That's the end of the presentation. I hope you found it useful. We, of course, welcome feedback of any kind, and we will be continuing to engage with all of our stakeholders as we go forward in the implementation of the system. So thank you for your attention, and we look forward to working with you.